It's that time of year where Easter is quickly approaching. The festivities are on the way with the decoration and the hunting and the gathering and things. However, I want to take some time on the Eden to Eden podcast to slow things down a bit and perhaps focus on the real issues surrounding Easter, which are the death, resurrection, and the ascension of Jesus that are all taking place. But it really starts before all that, too. I'm going to start us off in the Garden of Gethsemane, and I'm ready to dive in with you guys. So buckle up or stay buckled up or whatever you got to do with a buckle, but we're diving in right now. And we are indeed fastly approaching Easter, and I do want to slow things down a bit for us all. I am excited to discuss the Garden of Gethsemane today. It often gets sort of passed over rather quickly, and I don't want to do that. I want to slow things down because I think there's a good starting place in the Garden of Gethsemane, and I am just uber excited to get into this with you guys today. Let's get started. I'm going to actually be reading from the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Mark today. If you are driving in your car or perhaps mowing your yard or walking down the street or jogging, if you're one of those types of people, I would not recommend that you read along with me. For the sake of your own safety, I would recommend you not do that. However, if you are able to read along with me, I would encourage you to do so. And those of you unable to do that at the moment, I will read for you. Take heart. I've got your back here. Don't run into the street or get into a car accident because you're trying to read along. But I am going to read from Mark chapter 14, and we're going to start in verse 32 today. So I'm going to read along, and I want you to pay attention to the words. So we're going to read it. So if you have the ADHD brain like I do, try to focus for these 10 verses. And then if you can make it through, we'll do sort of a running commentary after we read it all. But I want us to get the whole section down first. So it says in Mark 14, verse 32, they came to a place named Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here until I have prayed." And he took with him Peter and James and John and began to be very distressed and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch." It's a good word, keep. And he went a little beyond them and fell to the ground and began to pray that if it were possible, the hour might pass him by. And he was saying, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." And he, Jesus, came and found them sleeping and said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep watch for 1 hour? Keep watching and praying that you may not come into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Verse 39, and again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came the third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? It is enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. Behold, the one who betrays me is at hand." So Jesus takes his disciples into the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, the Garden of Gethsemane is across from Jerusalem proper, the actual city of Jerusalem. What you have to do is you have to leave Jerusalem, you have to go down the Kidron Valley, and then you go up the opposing mountain, opposing the actual city of Jerusalem, which is the Mount of Olives. Perhaps you've heard, as you've read through the different Gospels, you've heard that Mount of Olives listed. Now listen, in 2011, I was a much younger, fitter man, but I did venture to Jerusalem. In fact, we went to the entire nation of Israel. But I did visit Jerusalem, and it was flabbergasting. I think I'm using that word correctly. The amount of effort it takes to go from Jerusalem, the city, down the Kidron Valley, up the other side to the Mount of Olives to get to where the Garden of Gethsemane is. And I can't understate it or overstate it enough. I can't overstate the sheer taxation it has on your body when you do this. Going from Jerusalem to the Mount of Olives, namely the Garden of Gethsemane, is a young man's game. I've always been sort of a girthier, sturdier fella. I've always been a bit dumpy and pudgy. But even when I was much younger, crossing the Kidron Valley, it takes its toll. It's very steep. I guess wearing horizontal stripes is not good for a girthy, sturdier fella, is it? Should have gone with the vertical stripes. But you know what? I'll learn that for next time. Next time, either solid black for the slimming effect or the vertical stripes, I assure you. However, this was something that Jesus frequently did with his disciples. He would go down the Kidron Valley, up the Mount of Olives for different reasons. And that's what he's doing here in Mark chapter 14. He has led his disciples to the Mount of Olives, where the Garden of Gethsemane where it lies. Gethsemane means oil press. That's the name of the actual name, Gethsemane. And it's going to be very fitting for the story here in a moment. And it's not massive. It's not a huge orchard or a huge garden. It's got some size to it, but it's not overly large. I remember when I went to the Garden of Gethsemane, it's divided into two parts. So if you go over there today, which at the time of this recording, Israel's at war, so maybe don't go this particular moment. But in the event of a ceasefire and somehow by the miracles of God, peace and safety open up over there, I would highly encourage you to go, because it is life-changing. And one of the more life-changing aspects of me going to the land of Israel was going to the Garden of Gethsemane. If you go there, it's divided into two parts. You have a big garden, not massive, but it's a bigger garden, and there's a road going right through the middle of it. And as you're walking down the Garden of the Mount of Olives, on the left side is a very pristine, well-kept orchard, grove, sort of what you would think in a garden. Trees, plants, life, prosperity, a lot going on. And they've got the monks out there with the drapes that they're wearing, the wardrobes, the curtains, with the legit rope belt, keeping everything you would think of in a monk. That's the guys that are out there, and they just kind of walk around and they just clip and they prune and they take care and they beautify that section of the garden. However, if you go down the middle of the road, you look to the right, there's another second part of the Garden of Gethsemane. And nobody goes in there. For some reason, it's all gated up. It's locked. Nobody's in there. But I happen to know a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who once knew a guy that got us into that section of the Garden of Gethsemane. And we were able to go in there in solitude, the group of people that I was with. And the guy that I knew who knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy had a big reason for suggesting that particular part of the Garden of Gethsemane was actually where Jesus was praying and ultimately arrested. And so it was cool to be in that section, and it was cool to be in solitude, in quiet, doing a Bible study, and imagining the Lord Jesus being in that moment, going through all the things we just read in this passage. And one thing that I did while I was there is as I was reading and praying and I got done with sort of my personal Bible study, I looked up and I just sort of imagined a big group of people with clubs and swords and different things, as the Bible mentions, coming to take Jesus away at night. At night shows the condition of their heart, not just the time of day, but it was life-changing to be there. And so Jesus, in verse 33, he takes Peter, James, and John. And this is typical of Jesus. We've seen in the Gospels periodically that Jesus kind of has this inner circle of Peter, James, and John that are doing various things with him at different times. They go up on the Mount of Transfiguration together. They do all sorts of things together. This is not abnormal for him to take these three. However, at this particular juncture in the story, it takes on new meaning as these three have just made grandiose, very crazy, big claims about Jesus. So after James and John's mother has asked Jesus, can they sit at your right and at your left in glory, in the kingdom? Jesus says, do you know what you're asking? Are you able to drink the cup that I'm going to drink? And so they want this big claim, and they say, yes, we can drink the cup that you drink, Jesus. We will follow you. We will do what you require of us. Everything will be great. And then that comes on the heels of Peter's just magnifying Jesus and saying, I will never deny you, Jesus. How could I do that? I will go with you unto death. I will never deny you. You're my dude. You're my Lord. You're my Savior. And so these three in particular have made very wild, big claims that they're going to be with him to the end, even to death. They can do anything that Jesus asks them to do. And so Jesus is going to put them to the test here in a way and say, well, if you're going to do these things that I'm going to do and require of you, you need to be in prayer, seeking encouragement and spiritual nourishment in order to do so. And so there's an aspect in which Jesus is modeling and giving them a chance to live up to their own expectations. And then there's also a sense in which Jesus simply just needs friends with him. I have a few friends. I don't know, kind of a weird flex, weird brag. I have a few friends. Where people tend to have a lot of friends, I've got a few friends, and I've got a few friends that I know will, in a pinch, without any description or any elaboration, they will come to help me with whatever it is that I need help with. And so there are times when I'm low, where I need spiritual encouragement or nourishment, that I'll talk to my wife, but I'll also call up my friends to be near with me in that moment. And I can think of some dear friends that have been with me during some tough and big life decisions. And so Jesus is needing that now. He's needing a time where his friends are nearby. And in verse 33, it has kind of this weird connotations to these words. It doesn't make sense, but then it makes total sense the more you dig into it. In verse 33, it says, "And he took with him Peter, James, and John, and began to be very distressed and troubled." Distressed and troubled. Now, I will not for one second claim to be fluent in Greek. I will not for one second claim to know what I'm talking about in Greek. But as I go and research the people who do know what these words mean, the word for distressed here connotes severe internal anguish. And even in the Greek word for distress, you have the word demon right in the middle of the word. So as you read it, you're kind of seeing where there's a spiritual attack against Jesus, namely a demonic attack, which is pushing his death more imminent and reminding him of the anguish that is going to take place now as you prepare for it, and ultimately what's about to take place. And so it's almost like we're seeing this weird spiritual attack where they're hurling anxiety at him. We have seen Satan present in a garden before. Now, even though the book of Genesis never outright says Satan was the serpent, we see in Revelation and throughout history where Satan is behind the actions of the serpent in some way. So we've seen him work against God's people in a garden before. This is nothing new to him. And so we have the spiritual attack that's going against Jesus that's causing him anxiety and anguish, and in some sense, a weakness. But that word is followed up with, he became to be distressed and troubled. Now, the word troubled here, it doesn't mean what I thought it meant, or maybe what you think it means. The word troubled here means amazed, astonished, or awestruck. That just does not seem to fit the mood of the passage here. When it says he was amazed, that's not seemingly a word I would put on Jesus at this particular time. He's amazed and awestruck and astonished. This word that is used here has the idea of how people feel when an angel of the Lord shows up, or when a divine spirit or creature shows up. This is reminiscent of Luke 2, where the shepherds are visited by the angels and they're tore up, they're amazed, they're astonished, and it actually has this idea of fear or alarm to it. They're alarmed, but they're amazed at the same time. And so that's what the word is here. So he's distressed, but he's also amazed. And so the way that we can compartmentalize those two or make them work and gel well together is to see that there's a spiritual attack, a demonic attack that's hurling anxiety. But on the flip side of that, he is at awed by the divine that has shown up to bring him spiritual encouragement. So he's distressed, but he's also being helped by angelic beings. Even Luke tells us in this same account that Jesus has an angel that shows up to give him aid. We know that the Spirit is with him, that the Father is with him during this time. And so he is greatly distressed, but he is also greatly supported by the divine that is there. And in verse 34, he says that his soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Deeply grieved to the point of death. One of a commentator that I really like is William Lane. Not to be confused with William Lane Craig. This is William Lane. And the way that he sort of rewords this is that the actual meaning is, my affliction is so great, I am sinking under the weight of it. Now, something that I don't do anymore, but something that I used to do, and this is just the only reason I'm bringing it up, is because this is kind of what I was reminded of as I was going through this. But I used to watch on YouTube the gym fails, and while they were maybe funny, I did get to a point where I realized I'm kind of just laughing at the misfortunes and accidents of others. And so I don't really watch it anymore, but I do want to use it as an analogy. And so what these people would do is they would go to the gym to work out, and they would inevitably be using the machines wrong. And, people are kind of in the corner just recording them because it's funny, their misfortunes and what their ignorance is funny to some. But there's always some that you could watch as you're watching the YouTube videos that would get into the squat rack. And if you're unfamiliar, it's where you put the big long barbell on your back, you move away from the squat rack, and then you just sort of go down and up. You're working your legs. And what I would notice is that in a lot of these times, you would have these 150-pound guys that would put like 500 pounds on the barbell. And then as soon as they would like miraculously get it off the rack, they would just collapse immediately. And a lot of times they would maybe do one rep and then they would exert so much force that they would pass out. Again, I stopped watching. I don't watch them anymore. But that's kind of the idea that I'm seeing here, is that Jesus has got the weight of sin that's starting to be loaded on him, and ultimately the wrath of God coming upon him. And he's just beginning to sink because he is fully man and fully God, but he is fully man. He has limited himself. He has taken on flesh in some regard, limited himself by taking on flesh. And so he is fully man, and he's sinking under the weight of the wrath and the sin that is being laid upon him. And it's just like that word that I was talking about. He was troubled. The Spirit of God, the angels show up, and it's just like they're helping him lift that back up again. And so it's amazing that his affliction is so great that he's sinking under the weight of it. Now, I do want to look here and start to draw some conclusions for you. In verse 34, he tells his disciples to keep watch. Now, this is a word. I'm going to start to draw some conclusions for you, and we'll bring it all to the fold later. But we have seen somebody in a garden before who was told to keep watch, and we should be reminded of Adam. Adam was told by God to cultivate the garden and keep it. So he look back in Genesis, cultivate and keep the garden. Now, cultivate just means to serve, but that word keep means to protect. And ultimately, Adam did a poor job of protecting the garden because he allowed sin into the garden and succumbed to that sin and that temptation. Well, Jesus is supplying the same language here. We have Jesus, who's the new and better Adam, but he's caring for his disciples in that he's telling them to keep watch, protect yourselves. Temptation is coming. Temptation is on its way, and you need to pray for the strength to protect yourself against that. And so that word keep is showing up here in a garden, and we're not meant to misunderstand that this is a referent back to the Garden of Eden. And so in verse 35, he went a little beyond them. Luke says that he went a stone's throw from those three. So we have the disciples, Jesus takes the inner three, and now he is leaving them and going a little bit further. And really, what happened in the ancient world is you prayed out loud. Sometimes you would go and pray by yourself and quietly. But even if you were to go into your inner room and shut the door, you would pray out loud. That was just what was common in the ancient world. And if we're a stone's throw away from the disciples, and Jesus is probably praying out loud, and he's grieved and distressed, he's probably praying with authority and out loud. It's very plausible that the three disciples, if not all 12, or 11, I guess Judas is tending to other things at the moment. It's very plausible that they could actually hear his prayers and how in anguish he actually was. And so this is a big deal that they're taking it very lightly, hearing the distress and the anguish of Jesus. And so Jesus goes and he falls to the ground. Matthew's account, we read Mark, but Matthew's account says that he even fell on his face, which is a complete and total sign of submission and obedience. Let me make sort of my first point here. Everybody, the way I wrote it down is sometimes we don't just need to say our obedience and submission. Verbally making our obedience and submission to God is important. However, if it stops there, if it's of no value, we need to show our obedience and submission as well. So honestly, and this is for me too, sometimes that looks like getting on your face in front of the Lord as a sign of total submission. Sometimes that requires us to do things that make us uncomfortable. in order to show our submission to the Lord. And this is what Jesus is doing. He is showing full submission and dependence upon God the Father to get him through what is inevitably on its way. And so this is just amazing to see Jesus' submission here to the Father. And he changes from verse 35, where he says, let this hour pass me by. It's a very passive, hey, it's on its way. If it could just kind of go by me, that would be great. He is suffering already at the mere thought of bearing the wrath of the Father, because Jesus is fully man, but he is fully God. He is the second person of the Trinity and is very aware of what the wrath of God is. And he's going to endure that. Verses 36, he outright asks, remove this cup from me. So he's ratcheting it up, his prayers. He went from let it pass to please just take it away if it's possible. Yet not my will, but your will. And he notifies Jesus, Jesus calls God the Father, he calls him Abba, which is an Aramaic word versus the Greek. The whole Gospel of Mark, with the exception of a word here or there, is written in Greek. But the author takes a step back and actually interjects an Aramaic word, Abba, which is the word for father. I'm not necessarily convinced that it's the word for daddy or dad that we often hear. It is the word for father. And the reason I think why Mark actually, or the author actually uses the word Abba, is because there's not a Greek word that actually fully encompasses what is at stake here. That Aramaic word, or the Hebrew connotation for Abba, connotes intimacy and obedience. And so I'm a father of 4, lovely children they are. However, that's a lot of kids. For me, that's a lot of kids. I know there's some people out there like, I got 7 or 8 of them. And I'm like, hats off to you. I've got 4. That seems like a lot. And I love them all. However, there are times when things are happening and I just need them to do as I say without me explaining, here's why I'm saying it. And so there are times when I'm like, well, let me explain why I had you do that, son, or let me explain why you needed to do that, daughter. There are times when I just like, for right now, I just need you to do what I'm telling you to do because I'm smarter than you. For a little while, they're getting smart. They are really, they're getting there. But for right now, I'm just smarter than you and I understand the process of things. So please just do it. And in an ideal world, my kids would be like, yes, Dad, Father, we will do as you say, for we acknowledge the wisdom with which you have in comparison to us. But they don't do that. And so this concept of Abba in the Aramaic, it means that. It's like a perfect scenario where I'm acknowledging you as Father, and I'm going to be obedient because I understand that your plans are higher than mine, and you understand things, and your will is better than mine at the moment. So when Jesus acknowledges the Father as Abba, he's saying, I would like for this to pass, but Father, I'm going to be obedient to what you are calling me to do. And so it's a cool thing that's going on there. And Jesus comes back after this round of praying, and he finds the disciples asleep, spiritually asleep, physically asleep. Remember, they are to be praying so that they don't come into temptation here, but they are literally sleeping and allowing this time to pass them by. And he addresses Simon specifically. There are 3 of them there that he is left to go and pray, but he addresses Simon specifically, and he says, what are you doing, Peter? Are you asleep? Could you not keep watch for 1 more hour? For 1 hour, you couldn't keep watch. You couldn't be on the state of protecting yourself spiritually and seeking God's encouragement and wisdom so that you don't fall into temptation. And it's almost like he's saying, come on, big boy, let's see. You just said you'll never deny me. You'll go to the grave in my name and in my honor. And here you are asleep. Come on, let's get going here. And in verse 38, this is powerful. Keep watching and praying that you may not come into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Spirit is willing to be whole. When Jesus invites us into relationship with the Father, he's the way, the truth, and the life, and we engage in that relationship, we are in the process of being made whole, which will have its completeness when he returns, but we are involved and invited into that process. But to be whole, we need physical and spiritual overlap. We need physical and spiritual overlap. What does that mean? When you think back to the Garden of Eden, you have God that is walking with Adam and Eve in some capacity. So you have the garden, which is a physical space, but it's being encroached upon by the spiritual. So God is working with them. So you have the spiritual and physical overlap that's bringing completeness and wholeness and harmony. And you need those things in order to physically and spiritually live out a life that is pleasing to God and to be fully saved. And so this happens when we surrender our life to the Lord, when we believe and have faith, and when we're baptized, we receive the Holy Spirit. We have physical and spiritual overlap, which is bringing about harmony with the Father. It's amazing what's taking place here. But he finds them sleeping for the third time. The third time. Now, we're going to quickly divulge. And you know what? I need a sip of coffee before we get into this because this has wrecked my world. I think it was N.T. Wright that said, it's amazing that the biblical authors could do such good theology without coffee. And I agree, because coffee goes right along with a good Bible study. So I mentioned he finds them sleeping for the third time. And the concept in number 3 is wildly important in Scripture. 3 shows up everywhere in the Bible. It's right there with the number 7 in terms of completeness or perfection or wholeness. When we look at the number 3, we often see harmony, perfection. Everything's good. The number 3 shows up in regards to this almost 500 times in the Bible. So we need to look at something that's mentioned 500 times and understand that this is probably pretty important. So just a quick few bullet points across the Bible. We start with the Trinity. God is 3 in 1. Father, Son, and Spirit make up the completeness of God. Now, even though we have trouble understanding that sometimes, at its core, we know that God is 3. Perfection, completeness, wholeness, and harmony in the Father, Son, and Spirit are in the Trinity. Jonah is in the belly of the fish, the great fish, for 3 days. There are 3 patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham is called to do something pretty amazing and sacrifice his son, which we don't have time to get into that right now. Maybe at another study we will. But he's told to go a 3 days journey in order to sacrifice him. Anytime we see a glimpse into the heavenly, we see the throne room scene, we have all these wild, weird creatures singing what? Holy, holy, holy. We have God often repeating himself for emphasis to the prophets and talking directly to others. And he repeats things 3 times. He even comes to Samuel 3 times before that connection is really established. There's a very famous quote out there that says, a strand of 3 cords is not easily broken. Jesus is tempted 3 times. And we even kind of get in on this today. Sometimes we're like, third time's a charm. This number 3 is important in the Bible, but it's really ratcheted up in this scene and sort of moving into the next week of Jesus's life. So let me paint the picture for you. Remember, the 3 is the complete, it's perfection, it's wholeness, it's harmony. So I'm going to illustrate with my fingers. But again, if you're driving, don't look, just listen. But Jesus goes with Peter, James, and John in this Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus prays in this section 3 times. There are 3 men who are caught napping 3 times during this Mark 14 passage. There are 3 prayer scenes in the garden where Jesus is praying 3 different times. I said earlier that we're in the Garden of Gethsemane, and that just means, Gethsemane just means oil press. So it stands to reason that in this garden, they did a fair amount of olive pressing. So why do I bring that up with the 3s? What is common today and was very common in the ancient world is you would press an olive 3 different times to extract the oil from the olive. And so they would press the olives and they would gather the oil from that first press. And that was what's considered, even today, extra virgin olive oil. And that was reserved for special holy practices in the ancient world, primarily in Judaism in the 1st century and in the previous centuries. But they would use that extra virgin olive oil for sacred rituals. They would anoint new kings with that. They would use it in temple structures and sacred things in the temple, and then they would press the olive oil again, and so a second time they would press it, and that would be the oil they would use for food and cooking and so on. And then the third time they would press, really get all that oil out of there, make the most of the olives, and they would include that with oils and soaps and different things like that. But it's fascinating that this oil press that's taking place would be done 3 times in the Garden of Gethsemane. And we could just see each time more and more being added to Jesus. He is, Father, can you let this cup pass from me? That's the first pressing. And then the second time, please remove this cup, if it be your will, but not my will, your will. And then he just is in anguish on that third pressing. We can see Jesus undergoing this press. He tells the disciples that are with him to keep watch 3 times. Again, keep watch, protect yourselves. Temptation is on its way. This is your time. Keep watch 3 times. Even when he's on trial, and Jesus has said this before, but even when he's on trial, they are accusing Jesus of saying he was going to destroy the temple, and in 3 days he will build it back up. He calls out Abba from the passage we just read. That word Abba is used only 3 times in the Bible. He's crucified on the 3rd hour of the day. Darkness fell on the earth for 3 hours. Jesus died on the 9th hour, which is actually 3 o'clock in the ancient world. And he's crucified as one of 3 people, and he was dead for 3 days. I mean, look at all the time that the word 3 or the number 3 shows up just in this account right here. And on the 3rd day of his death, which was the first day of the week, it all culminates in resurrection, which allows salvation to be possible for us, resulting in our wholeness, resulting in our harmony with God. So why is 3 keep showing up? Because we're meant, it's like the authors are beating us over the head with it. The ability to be at harmony with God is right now. It's happening. The ability to have a right relationship with God again, to be in a steadfast relationship with God, to have wholeness, to bring about that restoration. It's happening right now, and I don't want you to miss it. Someone say 3 over and over and over and over and over again. Going back to keep watch 3 times, and we're in a garden of Gethsemane, keeping watch, and there's this temptation apparently by Satan. Remember that the spiritual evil is hurling anxiety at Jesus, and Jesus is faced with the decision, will I act how I want to or how God is calling me to act, God the Father? And that's the same issue that resulted in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. They're faced with a decision. Do I just trust God that he knows what's best for me and act in the way that he has called me to? Or should I succumb to the temptation by the serpent and act in a way that's actually going to behoove and please me? I'm faced with the decision, and we're faced with this decision every single day, us now. Am I going to spend this money this way? Am I going to treat this person this way? Am I going to be dependent on this? Am I going to be prideful in this area? Am I going to hurt others in order to benefit myself? Or am I going to do those things? Or am I going to do what God has called me to do, which is to fervently seek him and love others as a way of showing love to him? We're faced with the same decision. So us who say, I would have never done what Adam and Eve did. How could they? How could they eat? They had it so good. Why did we do this all the time? God has called us to act as Christians. God has called us to act like little Christs, like image bearers, like Jesus is the way he's called us to act. And so if we're going to do that, we need to take on the approach that he took on in the garden here, which is not my will, but your will be done. And I can assure you, if your goal is to hurt others in order to promote yourself, that is not the Lord's will. If your goal is to treat others poorly at all, that is not the Lord's will. If your desire is to be dependent upon substances, if your desire is to be dependent upon money or status or anything else, that is not God's will. And the only way that you can get past that is through prayer and relinquishing yourself in submissiveness and obedience to the Father. Jesus has acted out perfectly how to act in those situations. So when we are faced with those, we need to be of the mind of Christ and pray through it and bring it to God. I also want to point out that Jesus makes his request known. I would like for this to pass from me. I would like for you to remove this cup from me, but not my will, your will. So it is okay to make your requests known to God. That's what the New Testament tells us. Make your requests known to God. God, I'm in line for this promotion at work. I would like this promotion. I'm in line to do this. I would like to do this, but not my will, your will. And we need to be okay with that without needing the satisfaction of knowing why. Going back to my kids, I just need you to put your shoes on because we got to go. I don't want to get into a big thesis as to where we're going and why, and we can do all that later. I just need you to put on your shoes for now. And that's the same thing with us. God, I don't know why I didn't get this, or this didn't work out for my family this way, or I don't know why you didn't heal this person, but not my will, but your will be done. So we're told to keep watch, to protect ourselves, and we can do that through prayer. Jesus, in verse 41, Jesus turns his gaze to the torches that are coming to him. He tells Simon and the other disciples, you've had a chance to pray 3 times and you've fallen asleep at the job 3 times. And so now you've missed your opportunity because look, here come the people that are going to take me away. And the way it's worded in verse 41, he says he came a third time, came a third time. And he said, are you still sleeping? It is enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Into the hands of sinners. Jesus is always known in the Gospels, in the New Testament, as being somebody that is associated with sinners. This is one of the biggest deals that the Jewish officials have against him. He's hanging out with sinners. He's eating with sinners. He's going over to the house of that tax collector or that sinner. This is what he makes his kingdom known for, is the gospel is for everybody. Everybody's a sinner, so I'm going to hang out with all these people that you would deem sinners. This is what he makes his ministry known as. He hangs out with sinners, and here it is, the same wording that's used. I'm going to be betrayed into the very people that I came to associate myself with. The King of the universe making himself available and fraternizing with sinners. Those are the same people that are going to ultimately be hurling this crucifixion at him. And so I don't want to tell you what takeaways you should take from this particular passage. I just kind of wanted to go through this passage of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane and just allow that to speak to your soul how you need it to, or how the Lord and the Holy Spirit need it to speak to you. And so one of the things that I have taken away is just seeing Jesus prostrate himself in front of the Father as a sign of submission and openness to do the Father's will. And how I find myself all the time faced with the decision, do I want to do this in my own will and in my own strength and in my own pride, or do I want to do this, which is God's way of doing things? And ultimately, I can make my request known, but it's going to be the most fulfilling, and I'm going to be able to be utilized in the kingdom much more effectively if I am submissive to what God is calling me to do. And I don't always know what that is, and it's frustrating sometimes. However, alls I can do, that's right, I said alls I can do is pray fervently that I don't fall into temptation. And as I am furthering my way from the enemy and from temptation, I am more in line with God's heart and allowing me to be obedient to what he's called me to do. And so we'll pick it up next time with Jesus's betrayal and arrest, which betrayal just means to be given over to the hands of, to be handed over. And so Jesus is handed over into the hands of sinners at the end of this passage. And we'll see how Judas interacts and what his trials and all that are like on the next episode. Hey, praying for you guys. Love you all. Hope you have a great week.